The Rekkr Chronicles. Monteagle, Tennessee. A quick resupply mission. Rage against the dying of the light. Rekkr knelt in the bushes, waiting. He was reading a poetry book that he had found at the last abandoned gas station that the team had passed by. The poem he was reading was written by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old rage should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Those wise men at their end know dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. And then he heard it. From a distance, a heavy military truck was slowly approaching. Rekkr took his eyes off the pages and looked up, confirming what he had heard. Putting the book inside his rucksack, he slowly laid down into position. 400 meters before him, a road serpentines from left to right. Perched on a hill and looking down, he had a clear field of view between the tangle of the trees and shrub. There was a pair of burnt-out cars on the right and a wrecked SUV on the left. The distance was approximately 100 yards or a football field away. Visibility was nominal, with minimal cloud cover. There were no animals. The carrion birds had long since picked clean whatever corpses remained in those cars. It had been over a week since their last encounter with the Legion. The last checkpoint provided some modest intel on local patrol routes by the Legion's poorly trained and even poorer equipped conscripts, along with a paltry supply of water and food. That was it. He had nearly exhausted his ammunition, mopping up the remainder of the local patrol group in this area. It was a shame. Years ago, before the rise of the beast system and its godless functionaries, those men could have been his friends, students, or useful members of a local community he would have taken pride in giving his business to. Now they were enemies. He understood the necessity to live and eat, to even provide for a family. But plenty of men had the courage to not comply with the mark. Those that failed this divine test and served the beast were all fair game. It was easy to check whose side you were on. You were either marked or you weren't. Those who were marked were not allowed into these refuges, though many would try. There are two types of citizens in the world now. Those sealed by the angels of God, faithful people, and those who sided with the Antichrist, commonly referred to as the beast, who chose to stand opposed to the warnings of John the Revelator. The sealed people of God were divinely protected and were usually found hunkered down in reinforced refuges, a place that angels would watch over and protect fiercely. Others that were sealed by God were those who would openly oppose the beast. They were often seen fighting against the armies of the beast, but were always overwhelmed by sheer size of the beast's legions. Many would be taken captive, and many were executed. Those who took the mark were forever changed. Not always in their outward appearance, but rather in their behavior. Though for some, it would morph them into creatures that were once talked about in legends and scary stories. The mark tainted their soul, their flesh, and their minds. They would become craven, desperate, some driven insane, and others filled with a suicidal regret. Some had tried cutting the mark off of their hands until they realized the mark sank deep through all layers of the skin, turning the skin a bright red and swollen from infections. Some tried cutting off their own hands, hoping it would free them from it, but the redness would still travel up the arm and spread. Those poor people, if caught, would have the marks stamped into their foreheads, for surely there would be no attempts at removing it afterwards. Those people didn't last long without the medicine required to counteract the mark. The mark was a genetically infused tattoo-like stamp, reminiscent to a QR scanning code with the numbers 666 grafted into a spiral in the direct center of the design. The ink in the mark was a living virus that ate its way down the skin and into the bone. It got into the DNA itself and would mutate it, causing severe side effects. The special medicines that would counteract the effects of the mark were not to only combat the infection it caused, but also to slow down its side effects. Though not readily available to the average citizens of the world who were marked, but as typical, almost made exclusively available to the elite class. The mark was always painful, and a constant reminder of the choice they had made. Its effects were sometimes equivalent to mad cow disease, but that was in the worst cases when people didn't have access to the medicine. After a while, without the medical treatment, people who were marked would start to change. They would become extremely thirsty and hungry, eating or drinking almost anything in sight. Those people were normally chased out or caught and deported out of the megacities, left to their own devices outside of the walls of these megacities. The changes would mutate their appearances in different ways. Many tried to commit suicide in various ways until another nightmare of Scripture was revealed to them. They could not remain dead. Their bodies would reanimate, and the dead would live again. Unlike the beast, whose deadly wound was healed, the mark would not heal from their wounds, but would go on to suffer, no matter how mortally wounded they were. This would cause many to reconsider an attempt at death, no matter how much they sought it. At first, the mark was considered to be a technological achievement in healing the human body. It stopped the aging process, stopped diseases, and even cancer. The mark had an incubation period, previously unknown to those who had chosen it. The full range of its side effects did not appear until the Accord of Peace was nullified. Unbeknownst to those who foolishly took the mark out of blind adoration for their new savior of mankind, the mark would then be activated. Through specific frequencies that were pulsed out by the satellites surrounding the Earth, much like the military-ran HARP project, this mark would begin to transform their very nature and likeness. Those who willingly took the mark had no prior knowledge of the fate that awaited them following the end of the 3.5 years of global peace. Rekkr was reminded of former pastor Russ Dizdar in the book he had written about satanic super soldiers called The Black Awakening. He also recalled scripture of Nimrod becoming a Gibberine, and drew the conclusion that the mark must have contained fallen genetic material that entered the bloodstream and bone marrow when it was activated. The exception being, these weren't turned into mighty hunters like Nimrod, but into accursed and sometimes monstrous beings. The worst case known were people who looked like the fabled monsters of old, those beasts who roamed our nightmares as children. The skin had changed, and they were tainted beings, resembling goatmen, minotaur, werewolves, and even other amalgamations of creatures that were likened to reptiles. No longer human in their appearance, but reminiscent of the creatures that once walked upon the earth before the flood of Noah. They no longer retained the cognition of men, but developed into primal instinct, which hinged on a pure hatred of their once fellow man. This must have been what Jesus meant when he spoke the words in Matthew chapter 24. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. These beastmen roamed the areas between the megacities and the surrounding towns, terrorizing those who ventured outside of their protective walls. They would attack and kill anything within sight, sometimes not even for the necessity of hunger, but rather for feeding on the fear they caused. They sought blood and flesh, but were never satisfied. The beasts would linger primarily around the megacities, waiting for fresh victims who were excommunicated from the strongholds, or from those venturing out from its protective walls, like their former selves or even the Legion. No man was safe from these monsters. They would just as quickly turn on and fight one another when two would meet. Luckily, they were limited in their numbers, but still horrific to witness in person. There was yet again another set of monsters to mention, but they were found only at the megacities. These were the giants. Another one of the unknown side effects were the rarest case of the giants. The giants, another cursed creature found during these times, were used to protect the megacities from those beastmen and foreign invaders. Yes, even during these times, the megacities would war with one another. The giants wore loosely covered armor made from stripped-down construction machinery and carried enormous spears made from scraps of building materials, or used crude clubs made from anything the workers inside the megacities could create. They were slow-witted, but fierce, and ate anything they could catch or kill that found itself trapped in their domain. They were loyal to their masters inside the megacities, but only to a certain degree. If they weren't fed multiple times a day, they would turn on those they were guarding. Outside of the high walls of the megacities were another set of high walls. This is where the giants roamed. In order to traverse the land of the giants, the Legion would travel in heavily armed convoys when moving outside of the megalithic walls of the megacities through specially made corridors. One had to navigate through a superstructure that looks like a throwback from the movie Jurassic Park. Commonly known as a sallyport, the Legion were protected by their enormous guards through means of a series of electrified, reinforced steel fences that created a protective alleyway from the doors to the megacity to the outer perimeter doors. These doors were all controlled remotely so as to never having a tempting human meal within sight of the giants. The Legion used other protective measures, like sound cannons or flamethrowers, to ward off any approaching giant that would attempt to charge their way through the fence. Even though the worst case of those marked did turn into giants, there was still a fragility to them, which was why they could not venture far away from water. They had to consume enormous amounts of water due to their overly muscular, deformed bodies that seemed to be constantly growing in size. The change was so drastic and excruciatingly painful that it damaged their bodies' ability to regulate temperature. The giants were constantly dehydrated and consumed almost as much food and water as an elephant would need to sustain itself. The giants had poor eyesight, but keen hearing and sense of smell. Some giants would simply fall over dead. Their bodies were unable to keep up with their extreme accelerated growth, but then they would regenerate because death would flee from them. They were lumbering, almost comically, oversized engines of destruction and malice. However, when they got up and going, they could move fast and were shockingly violent. Some giants were abnormally mutated, causing tusks to grow out of their jaws, or in rarer cases, take on the appearance of a cyclops, with the overgrowth of bone that would be jutting out of their foreheads and causing one eye to wither while the other grew grotesquely large. Where the average height of a giant was between 10 to 14 feet tall, there were still bigger ones. The cyclops were the largest and most dangerous of this new species, and extra precautions had to be taken when they appeared. These rare forms of the giants could reach heights of 20 feet tall and weighed nearly 8 tons or more. The ground around them would literally shake when they walked. These are the alpha of alphas, and could easily kill their smaller siblings. Every giant was created from a man. No woman could change into a giant. It would seem that the females were not granted the privilege of becoming the newest human spin-off, now classified as the Homo maximus. These humanoid mounds of flesh grew to such enormous proportions due to excess secretion of growth hormone due to the genetic transference of fallen DNA through the mark. Much like the case studied of those famed giants of men and women who grew to exceptional heights when compared to their fellow man, so too did these once human men. In the cases of these giants, the mark enhanced the pituitary glands, which produced inhuman-like growth factors, but were very detrimental. The growth of the gland would cause a tumor-like protrusion inside the brain, causing what appeared to be something akin to encephalitis. This factor caused both the poor eyesight and the overheating of the body. Every giant suffered through extreme growth of the bone and tissue. In every case, there would be splitting of the skin due to the rapid rate at which they grew at their large proportions. Their skin would split and reknit itself in a crude manner of repair, making them appear as though they were striped like tigers. The transformation of those marked men was not the blessing they believed it would be, but a tragic and torturous curse they would never escape or find relief from. The giants still maintained a semblance of humanity to them. They were known to talk in a strange, almost stupid form of gibberish that was just barely understandable, and laughed on occasion at each other like children do. No clothes could fit them, for they were always growing, and they were even less hygienic. During the feeding times, the giants would be seen eating meals together and fighting one another for every scrap. The giants would roam their no-man's land between the walls in gangs and were given oversized and reinforced children-like toys just to keep them entertained. Nothing worse than bored, brain-swollen giants. There were large ponds throughout the giants' land, where you would find them most of the time during the day, keeping their overgrown bodies cooled, or they would be sleeping in the oversized stables that were made specifically for them. This wasn't anything of luxury, just large metal-roofed structures with 3 walls and piles of hay or some other softer materials that they would sleep on. They were most active at night, and that is also when they were the most dangerous. Unlike the beast men, the giants would not predate upon one another. Instead, the megacities would feed them with ground-up organic matter that would be turned into large, soft bricks of substance. Typically, their meals were a gruel of genetically engineered laboratory-grown meat that would be formed into a meatloaf-like meal. However, the leftovers of any food that was not eaten, or even the dead animals inside the megacities, would also be added to this concoction as extra ingredients for the giants' diets. Anyone who lived in a megacity was demanded to recycle all organic matter for the feeding of their gigantic protectors, under penalty of excommunication. The giants, who looked more like the ogres of old, were not like the giants of the Old Testament. These weren't half-angelic, half-human prodigy. These were the current advancements of a dark, satanic-inspired genetic manipulation and the transhumanists who sought after immortality, who needed their super soldiers. The giants filled part of that need and the legions filled the other. One of the cruelest fates for those marked was that they couldn't die from the excruciating pain of a certain event. The Bible tells us in Revelation that death would flee from them. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. Revelation chapter 9, verse 6. This refers to a scene from Revelation chapter 9, verses 2 to 5, where he opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke, like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power, like the power of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green plant, or any tree, but only those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were allowed to torment for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. But this torment from the locust will still come, and death followed with them. Rekkr checked his watch. It was 16:30. The sun was still high. It was muggy. The rain had come and gone in a tremendous storm over Monteagle, but the humidity lingered. He was already chafing from the sweat, dampening his clothes underneath his poncho. The wind had blown away all but the most stubborn of storm clouds. He would have no inclement weather to foul his movements or play tricks on his senses. Rekkr scanned the area left and right while the distant rumbling of a heavy diesel engine was growing louder. He looked up one last time to the heavens and muttered a brief prayer of protection, blessing, and thanksgiving before placing the buttstock of his heavy Sig Sauer 716 AR-10 rifle into the crook of his shoulder. He readjusted his hips and settled deeper into the prone position, using his backpack as a shooting rest. The sound of the diesel grew louder. "Thank you, Lord, for delivering your enemies into my hands," he whispered. "May your Holy Spirit bless my body, that this flesh might be an instrument of your will. Make my aim true and my mind sharp." He began to take slow, deep breaths and calmed his nerves, flipping the safety selector switch to fire and gently laying his finger on the trigger. "And if it be in your will, Lord, a little luck and some fun wouldn't hurt." And he finished his prayer. The truck engine grew louder. Rekkr could see the entire kill box from one disabled vehicle to the others in his high-powered variable optic. The red crosshair of the optic was hovering over the front windshield of the truck as he heard the brakes squeal. The diesel truck was a canvas-covered troop carrier, like the kind one might find in a backwater National Guard armory from the Cold War. However, this one had been upgraded and modified. It was painted dark gray, with the Legion's symbol on the hood and their regional division's numbers stenciled on the doors. Rekkr could spot extra armor plating haphazardly tack-welded onto the flanks, especially along the undercarriage around the gas tank. The tires were heavy tread run flats, capable of chewing through most debris and still have enough grip to crawl its way up an embankment. Rekkr watched as the vehicle clumsily negotiated the road, but couldn't move past the abandoned vehicles that were blocking its path. A half-skilled driver would have just pushed the vehicles out of the way with the large diesel truck, but here, on this road, with culverts on either side, boggy deep trenches, and steep drop-offs fouling any sort of quick skirting of the obstacles, the vehicle's capabilities were rendered moot. There were voices, and an opening of a vehicle door. A skinny, tall man jumped down and began surveying the scene before him. "I said we can't go around it this time, Chauncey," the tall man shouted from the front of the diesel truck. "The rain's mucked it all up. We need a recovery vehicle to drag us out of it if we get stuck." "So what do we do, Sarge?" shouted the driver, head and arm hanging out of the window. The taller sergeant rubbed his chin in feigned contemplation. He snapped his fingers and pointed at the driver. "Get the freaking tow strap. We'll drag them out of the way." His driver gave an exaggerated thumbs up with a mocking grin and laughing. Rekkr pulled the trigger. The 6.5 Creedmoor match round cracked through the air, and by the time Rekkr was able to readjust his eyes through the muzzle flash and felt soft jolts of recoil, the driver's head was hanging from his shoulders. The driver's arm went limp. His torso slumped against the interior of the door and fell back into the driver's seat. It took a moment for his body to realize that he was dead. Grotesque to watch through his scope, but Rekkr could make out the laughter on the driver's nearly severed head as the demon who inhabited him left. He thought to himself, "Next target." The Legion sergeant instinctively jerked at the report of the rifle and then froze where he stood. For a moment, his malnourished mind had a hard time assimilating the sight of his nearly decapitated driver. Slowly, he came to his senses. He looked left and right, arms out at chest level, palms raised, fingers splayed open, the international sign of surrender. Rekkr watched him through his rifle's scope, slowly rode the trigger shoe out until he felt the audible click of its mechanical reset. He took another breath and exhaled. The reticle found its way to the sergeant's radio holster on his cheap chest rig. Rekkr waited for the right angle and took the shot as the man was turning. Rekkr fired again. The round zipped like a laser through the air, instantaneously obliterating the radio and cutting a line through the sergeant's left pectoral, ribs, and tearing out his shoulder. The round hit hard, and the sergeant twirled in the air to a face-planting tumble on the broken asphalt. His reaction more of one of shock than physics, injury, or pain. His yelp echoed through the air as he flopped like a fish out of water, and then to a sprawl on the road. Rekkr smoothly re-engaged the safety on his rifle and rose from his position. He readjusted the 2-point sling to take up some slack and began padding through the undergrowth towards his prey, like a wolf approaching its kill. He looked both ways before crossing out of the tree line, making sure no one else was coming. These days, most motor vehicles were operated by members of the Legion. Normal civilians had no use for them, being corralled in their 15-minute high-density population centers or the hive-like megacities. Anyone caught outside those protective walls were deemed a target of opportunity, completely void of human rights and protection. The only ones who resisted were those who refused to take the mark, and each day it seemed like there were fewer and fewer of them in Rekkr's travels across the countryside of Tennessee. Rekkr's eyes kept darting from the truck to the sergeant, who was now squirming and mewling like a wounded rabid animal. He kept a vigilant eye on the truck to make sure no one else came jumping out of the back. He figured if no other troops had manifested by now, they were either too gutless or too few to matter. No one spilled from the canvas-covered flatbed rear, and so Rekkr figured they were alone. But with the radio destroyed, Rekkr's time was now limited. He strode to the center of the road nearest the two burnt-out vehicles, where the sergeant crawled on his belly, blood smearing the asphalt behind him like a slug trail. "Good evening, traitor. Keep your hands where I can see them. That killing field back there. That you?" The sergeant stopped crawling and rolled over, clutching his wounded shoulder. He stared up into the blue sky. Rekkr's hulking silhouette bore down on him like a mountain. It took the sergeant a few seconds to process, but eventually he understood. "Define us, asshole," he growled through his gritted teeth. "We just carted them out there. It's not like it's our idea." Rekkr kicked the sergeant in the teeth with his boot. "Over 100 children," Rekkr said grimly. The sergeant spat blood and grinned devilishly amidst his pain. 169, actually." He saw Rekkr's head tilt and braced himself for another kick, this time in the ribs. "What are they to you, man?" Rekkr fought his churning stomach and slung his rifle. He drew his Glock from its Safariland holster and held it at his front in a low-ready position. "Where is he?" "Who?" The sergeant grunted. "Your boss. Who else?" The wounded sergeant laughed around his pain, spitting out teeth and more blood. "You mean she. And she is our spiritual guide, our connection to the Dark One. She is our prize sorceress, our link to the Master, and the Master loves the little children." Rekkr studied him for a beat. "So, you have witches instead of priests. Why am I not surprised?" "Hey, pal, call it whatever you will. We just get paid to stand and move. You got a problem with it, you take it up with the council in Nashville, or any of the other 50 freaking population sitters across the country, where they burn people to the beast image. I just do what I'm told, so I don't get turned to paste and my kids have a place to sleep at night. I'm just following orders, man." "So am I." Rekkr stomped on the prone sergeant's throat with a heavy boot and started applying pressure until the man yelped in pain. Due to the heavy blood loss, the sergeant could barely even fight back, but unfortunately could still talk. "Then why are you and the other scum out here killing us and harassing things, huh? Do you even know who we serve? We got orders, man. This is all that's left of civilization. It's take the mark and serve 'em or die. You stupid, foolish bastards are trying to burn it down. A bunch of barbarians at the gates. Oh, you see how good we got it now? There's barely anything left after the war. He's given us a second chance." "Oh, how easily you were all deceived." "Whatever, man. I was a Buddhist and lived peacefully until this shit happened." The sergeant slurred out through the shattered mouth. "A Buddhist, huh? Well, I take my orders from a higher authority," Rekkr declared. The sergeant chuckled. teeth blood-begrimed. "Oh yeah, sure. Your precious Jesus. Whatever. I love fairy tales too, but I don't put cookies out every Christmas hoping for my stocking to get filled. Lord Nero Pseudo-Christos saved us from all that bullshit and nuclear annihilation. His miracles saved us and what's left of us. The beast has won. So why don't you just join, just get in line like everyone else, and stop being such a..." Bang. Rekkr shot the man in the forehead. The sergeant gurgled blood for a moment, his body not realizing that his brain was now obliterated. He waited for the legionary to stop squirming under his boot. The body jostled around and then went still. Those lifeless eyes now lift glassy and staring wide at nothing. Then a wispy laughter crawled out of the sergeant's lips and dissipated. Rekkr kept the pistol pointed at him and paused for a second or two. Then he knelt and unholstered the sergeant's Glock 17, taking the spare magazines as well. Rekkr searched the man over, stripped him of anything useful, and then began to scan the area. He went over to the truck where he located some bottles of water and some prepackaged cheap food. There were extra rounds of 9mm ball ammo, green tip 5.56 ammo stored in a green ammo can, along with a small stale medical kit, and to top it off, a smoke grenade, a pop-up flare, and a fragmentation grenade. Damn, he cursed to himself. No radio. He looked back over at the sergeant's body, then stepped out of the truck. Rekkr then walked around carefully scanning for any surprise threats, and then began to search the rear of the truck. He activated the weapon's lights on his SIG 716 and flung open the canvas flap. To his mild surprise, there was only a smattering of oil bottles and other detritus, and what looked to be a tan rucksack in the back corner. Confirming that there were no hidden surprises lying in waiting, Rekkr mounted the bumper and climbed into the truck bed. Quickly, he saw that the floor of the bed was layered in dried and wet bloodstains. He approached the rucksack and observed it cautiously before reaching forward and unbuckling the top flap cover. There were dirty children's clothes and some stuffed toys, some still covered in blood. There was women's jewelry and random sets of shoes. "Oh dear God," Rekkr said out loud. "These are from the killing field. This stuff belongs to those people." Rekkr pulled out a small plush rabbit doll, sprinkled in innocent blood, and then the rage came upon him. Mortified and disgusted, Rekkr closed the bag and threw it out of the rear of the truck. Now slightly hyperventilating and quickly going mad over the profound grossness of this discovery, Rekkr had finally lost control. Jumping out of the back of the truck and filled with wrath, he unlatched the jerry can filled with fuel that was stored at the side of the truck behind the cab. Stomping his way back to the driver's side, he ripped the door open, violently yanked the driver's corpse out of the seat. Dragging a limp body and carrying the fuel, Rekkr went back to where the sergeant still lay. Tossing the driver's body on top of the sergeant, he began to pour the fuel can's highly flammable contents over them both. The remaining fuel he poured unskillfully into an empty flask and stored it in his own rucksack. He fished around in his pack until he grabbed what he was looking for. Now, item in hand, He walked to the side of the road and picked up a small stick. Wrapping some duct tape onto the end of the stick, he walks back over to the middle of the road. Dipping the end of the stick into the fuel, he lit the duct tape with his lighter and watched the fire come to life. He then unceremoniously set the bodies on fire. Before leaving, he poured out the contents of that infernal tan rucksack that he had found in the back of the truck onto the burning men, and sat the tan rucksack down about 5 feet away. He placed the rabbit on the road, reclining it against the rucksack, facing the bonfire. The doll's eyes were a reflection of the inferno before it, and the fleeting image of a large man walking back into the woods. He left a folded note taped to each arm of that doll that reads, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And the other note says, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old rage should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." Signed, Rekkr. The Rekkr Chronicles. Annadale, Tennessee. The Council of Nine. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. We have to keep moving, Lake said, taking a drag on his newly lit cigarette. I know, Rekkr replied from his seat across the fire. There were 9 of them, all armed and armored, huddled around a small fire in the forested hills. The early morning fog hid the team in smoke of their meager campfire. Rekkr adjusted the blanket on the young boy who was laying down next to the fire that kept him warm. Since rescuing the kid, Rekkr took to looking after him. The boy reminded him so much of his sons, so he was acting out his role now as a protector again. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving this child alone in the wilderness to fend for himself. He knew that the horrors lurking in the woods now, not just the threat from people, but also from the monsters. Rekkr watched the boy sleep. He was probably just 10 or 11 years old. Dark hair, skinny, and terrified. The thoughts of his family were always at the forefront of his mind. It was what drove him, guided him, and what had created this brutish behavior that he now possessed. Rekkr was a family man. He loved his kids, dearly missed his wife. And the thought of their condition without him drove him mad and into a state of near berserker-like rage when he came into conflict with just about anyone. A delicate thread of his humanity snapped when the power supply was taken down by the Legion. When it never came back on, Rekkr knew it was about to get bad quick. His inner turmoil worsened every day since, and now his utter desperation to get home was all he had. His family was always in his thoughts. He could see them, see the kids playing, hear his wife singing, and envision them all beckoning him to hurry home. That was the risk of the job that he took. Get the rich man and his family to safety, take his payment of gold, and rush like hell to get home. Except now the roads are blocked off by bandits, gangs, and the Legion. Not to mention some have been intentionally destroyed. Rekkr sat next to this boy by the fire, keeping watch over him. His mind wandered as he stared into the fire. How do I get home the fastest? ATV, motorcycle, bicycle, horse. A horse may be my best bet if I can find one that hasn't been eaten or hidden away in the backcountry. Bikes and ATVs are just too loud, and my knees aren't pedaling a stupid bicycle up a mountain or hill. His back and his knees were killing him tonight. Painful injuries from his younger years of carrying a gun for the government was really biting him in the ass now. Rekkr lived off of 800 milligram ibuprofen and half a tablet of hydrocodone just to numb the pain. Sometimes it was all he could do to keep himself functional. He found the cache of meds in an abandoned small-town pharmacy, along with some much-needed allergy medicine and some basic medical supplies. Rekkr fetched the much-needed pain-relieving pills from a pouch on the right side of his vest. That pouch housed any bits of food he had that wasn't stowed in his pack, along with the medicine. He hated the fact that he had to take this stuff, but there was just things he could no longer function at high capacity without. It wasn't an addiction, however. It was growing into that with every passing day and every new mile. Rekkr took a single hydrocodone, snapped it in half, then a single 800 milligram ibuprofen and swallowed them, flushing down the pills with some newly gathered fresh water from one of his canteens. Rekkr pulled out his tobacco pipe and began cleaning out the bowl while Lake tossed a fresh insult his way. "You going soft on us, Rekkr?" Lake said as he blew smoke towards the fire and smiled, pointing down at the sleepy child. Without word or warning, Rekkr produced his axe from the frog at his hip and slung it in an upwards arching spin towards Lake. He cut the cigarette from his hand, buried itself in the tree next to where he was sitting. The other men froze, amazed at the eruption of speed and unpronounced violence of Rekkr's movements. All hands were instinctively going to weapons as Rekkr stared at Lake. No one moved. The air was tense. Lake had this coming to him. Lake arched an eyebrow, hand shaking from the adrenaline dump of the near-death experience. Point taken. Rekkr, peace, man, be still, just chill out. Lake was just joking around. Hogg stood up and put himself between the two. Rekkr didn't say a word. He just stared down Lake until the smaller man looked down into the fire, grabbed for another cigarette, hand still shaking. The fact remains the same, brother. Came another voice from around the fire. The old biker. He was an older man of thin build, with a bald head and a long gray handlebar mustache. The kid will slow us down, Rekkr. We're low on rations, low on options. And Lake, don't poke the bear, you dipshit. Rekkr slowly stood and took a stance at his side of the fire. Then we can hand him off to the next group of friendlies we come across. Dinah, he's just a kid. We have to protect him and get him to safety. His family isn't far from here. Rekkr finally spoke. Psalms 82 verse 4. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. You remember that, Dinah. That's our orders from the Master. That's what I have sworn. And that's what I will perform. And none of you will get in the way of that, or I am out of here. Rekkr was so taken back that these men kept falling back to self-preservation, and would seem to forget sometimes that we're here to help the innocent and hunt down the enemies of the throne when the chance was given. However, this is typical behavior in this type of environment now. So quickly and so often did things go bad that it took a serious mental toll on everyone in the group. Understanding this, Rekkr calmed himself and eased his stance. No disrespect, bro, but what friendlies? And where the hell is Safe at? Lake said in a lowered voice that was genuinely filled with concern. The Legion has done a pretty good job of rooting out any resistance in these parts, even with their numerous gun trucks and possessed simpletons. Hey, kid, the old biker had said louder, throwing his voice to Rekkr's flank where the little boy lay curled up, now awake, and eating a prepackaged granola bar. If your family isn't housed behind the high walls of the Haven that's just outside of Nashville, then where are they? He shrugged and took another bite of the granola bar. We were in a town with a bunch of houses, he mouthed around his minuscule meal. There were lots of us. I think Dad was leading the other people to try and find food and bullets. He took a stiff, upright posture. Dad always said, you can win wars off of beans, bullets, bandages, and a good radio. Some of the others don't like that. Things got bad when my dad took some of the men and left to go find supplies. Parents were fighting about what to do and stuff after they left. My older brother yelled at people and wanted to find our dad, but my mom and sister said no way. They weren't going to let him do that. So he and a few other kids grabbed their guns and snuck out of the Haven at night, but they didn't get far. He's dead now. The Legion was waiting for them down the road. After that, the people just started leaving at night. Then the Legion would show up and kill anyone who ran. So how did you end up in the woods outside of the Haven? Lake asked. I was with my brother when the other older boys snuck out, said the kid. Well, I kinda snuck out after they did, and I found them down the old path in the woods. My brother was so mad at me. The 9 men traded glances across the fire. Some shifted their weaponry and coughed. All understood what was being explained. Lake looked over at the old biker and said, "Sounds like they walked into a trap. Or they tried to pick a fight," the older mustachio man stated. Lake lit another cigarette and blew smoke out of the side of his mouth. These damn people, Dinah. Maybe these need men like us to keep them safe from their own dumb ideas. Nearly 32 years separated the two men. Rekkr had noticed that Lake's confidence and courage sometimes lacked the street smarts of his elders, men who had bought their wisdom with blood and scarred knuckles. Beware of an old man, and professions where good men die young, little Lake, Dinah replied, enunciating that last word with a kind of indulgent elocution that elicited a warning of disdain by its tone. No one around them challenged the dire warning, least of all Lake. Rekkr was back at cleaning his pipe, and then grabbed for his tobacco pouch in his pack. "What do you propose, then?" Casper inquired. Dinah leaned back against the trunk of his tree with a Cheshire grin and closed his eyes, settling into an expression that curled his handlebar mustache into a Glasgow smile. He put his hands behind his bald head and shrugged. "Can the kid hump a pack?" Everyone turned to Rekkr, who was stuffing rich coffee and chocolate-flavored tobacco into his pipe. He looked over at him. The firelight cast odd shadows on his face as it danced across the burn scars, marring the right side of his visage. Rekkr lit his pipe, puffed the fire to life inside the bowl, and then breathed in heavily. Blowing out the smoke through his nostrils, Rekkr looked back at Dinah, then into the fire. "I had a backpack for school," the boy said, "and my dad made me carry computer stuff when we moved around. I used to carry some of the food, too." He threw the wrapper of the granola bar into the fire. "But they said things were missing. Said I ate them." The men around him laughed. "But I didn't." "No one said you did, little one," Rekkr reassured soothingly. Dinah offered the little boy something to drink. "You want some water or some coffee?" Dinah asked. "No thanks, I like Sprite," he grumbled. "Like the soda?" Rekkr asked. "Yeah, I wish I had some right now. I have a few cans of it in my room." "Well," Lake said as he stood and plucked Rekkr's axe from its moorings in the tree trunk, "at least he has a call sign now." He laughed and reached across the fire, handing Rekkr's axe back to him. Rekkr stood and took it, making sure to linger in his physicality for a moment. He was taller than Lake by a head, but he was wider and thicker than Lake by a wide margin. He held the other man's eyes as he retrieved his axe, letting the message sink in. Lake, finally regaining some sense of courage, smiled and said, "Hey, Jason Voorhees. My bad, man." Rekkr shook his head and smiled slightly. "Same, man. My bad." Dinah sighed, sensing the easing of the tension. "Hey, Rekkr. About yesterday. That was supposed to have been a resupply mission. Hey, big dog, you listening? Not a slaughter," he told him. "Not a recruitment or rescue op either. We could have gone around that checkpoint." Rekkr looked at Dinah. "We could have skipped it. We could have skipped right over it, man. That's all I'm saying. You didn't have to hit it." Rekkr replied, "I had no choice. They weren't about to give over their ammo and supplies to me nicely, old man." Everyone around the fire chuckled at that reference. It might be the end of the world to some people, but you couldn't save yourself from the old man jokes. The incident Dinah referred to happened the day prior, and what a day that was. They had been moving all night, stopping only to get their bearing and shoot an azimuth and reference their map. They tried to gain as much ground as possible during these hours of darkness. The forest was thick, and the cool mountain air was thick with precipitation. They were roughly 20 or so miles northwest of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, moving through the dense Frozen Head State Park. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory was a known site for the paranormal encounters since its early days of use, but now was a consistent place for summoning the demonic forces of darkness. There was a portal that had opened in the facility that consumed all living matter until the portal collapsed on itself and acts like a doorway to another dimension where unthinkable creatures lurk and sometimes climb out of. Scientists had tried to contain the black hole-like portal by numerous means, but nothing prevailed. From pouring concrete onto it to even bombing it, the portal would consume everything. Due to the old rumors of demons and monsters being present at that location at times, the team decided to give the Oak Ridge National Laboratory a wide berth. Rekkr had taken point on patrol through the Frozen Head State Park. While walking at a westerly direction through the gorges and slopes of the Fork Mountain, they were eventually able to observe a bird-encircled landfill and then the Morgan County Correctional Complex. The complex was now an outpost for the Legion, and the landfill was used as the open-air cemetery for the martyrs and anyone else who refused the mark, but were caught by the Legion. It took a few slow hours to get off the mountain's northwest slope and make their way down to Highway 27, just north of the town of Wartburg, Tennessee. By daybreak, they would find a dark-covered place in the thicket near the town of Annadel and wait for the darkness to return. Moving during the day between towns was treacherous and risky. Fortunately for them, the world was not as full of people as it once was, but sadly, it was still filled with dangerous and unfriendly people. But there were also now other things to worry about than just people. Rekkr was woken up just before the evening was over and told Dinah that he was going to go scout ahead and that he would be back in 20 minutes. That's a 10-minute walk out and a 10-minute walk back. It was always risky to go scouting, but sometimes it was necessary to get it done as soon as possible before the light was lost and everyone else was still trying to wake up and prepare for the night's long movement. This evening, the routine scouting went bad, fast. While following a walking trail, Rekkr spied the Annadel Road and followed it to a dramatic bend where a Legion checkpoint was established. What happened next lasted only minutes, but forced the group to run for an hour or so until they could barely jog and then barely walk. They kept this pattern of movement up all night until the next day and arriving in Deer Lodge, Tennessee. Here's what happened. He was glassing the checkpoint, guards, and guard shack. Surprised by the lack of security and the complacency of the guards, Rekkr made the decision to hit the checkpoint by himself. One of the guards was leaned against a tree in the same wood line that he was approaching from, with headphones on, probably listening to music. The other guard was sitting in the chair across the road in front of the guard shack. This was a simple vehicle checkpoint with 2 gate guards and probably 1 relief guy sleeping in the shack. Standard setup for this type of security checkpoint. Rekkr thought to himself, I can easily take on 3 of the dumb fools and be done with it in minutes. Then I'll take their stuff and go back and grab the boys. Or at least, that's how he thought it was going to happen. Rekkr grabbed the unsuspecting guard by the drag handle of his plate carrier and hoisted the man up as a living shield. Drawing the Glock pistol from the guard's Safariland holster, Rekkr engaged the other guard across the street sitting in the chair, hands on head and half asleep. First shots missed the guard, striking the shack and scaring the guard so bad that he literally sprang up out of the chair and drew his pistol. Multiple shots were exchanged with the newly acquired living shield soaking up most of the returning gunfire. Either by blind luck or some unknown force, the other guard's pistol has a double feed in the chamber, causing the bullets to pile up, not allowing the gun to fire properly. Rekkr walks the man down in seconds, clearing the road and striking the guard 4 times in the pelvic girdle. The guard collapses and screams and moans, pleading now for his life as the blood leaches through his blue uniform pants. Without hesitation, Rekkr fires 1 more round and then paused. 1 bullet was meant for the guard bleeding out on the ground. The other one was a contact shot behind the ear of his fellow, now lifeless, human ballistic shield. As the guard's skull shattered like an egg into the helmet and the red matter oozed over Rekkr's darkened features, he still maintained hold of the man in his hand, staring down into the eyes of the frightened guard, who by now was starting to lose his faculties due to the massive hemorrhage from the destruction of his guts and pelvic girdle. Rekkr tossed the deceased hostage, as he had been holding up in his left hand, to the ground with a sickening thud. That poor, once useful bullet sponge didn't stand a chance. Rekkr loomed over this second dying man, his new prey. Without pity or remorse, Rekkr fired 1 last round directly into the tee box, or the bridge of the nose, dead center in the face of the guard. Now gaining his wits back, Rekkr assesses the situation quickly. Hearing a radio transmission from the guard shack, Rekkr takes a lower profile and quickly raids the leftover gear of the 2 carcasses and moves towards the shack. Thinking to himself, surely, if there was a 3rd man at this checkpoint, he would have had made himself known. With a fresh magazine in his Glock 19, Rekkr takes aim at the closed door of the guard shack. The guard shack was nothing more than a 12 by 12 building that acted as a guard relief station and radio communications room. There was a porta-john behind the shack that would also have to be swept and cleared, but now the entry had to be made. The unknown material intelligence and other potential necessities were behind that closed door, and he didn't have any time to spare sightseeing. Gun up and pieing the only door to the small shack, Rekkr could see the glow of the interior lights as they crept out from underneath the door seam as the darkness of the evening was quickly approaching. Thinking to himself, just kick the freaking door in. I don't have time to waste. This has to be a dynamic entry. Rekkr approaches the door, grits his teeth, and with one strong kick to the door, Rekkr would surge through the fatal funnel with murderous intent. Splinters of the door jamb explode near the doorknob into the new unknown threat, and Rekkr immediately hits his corners, clears his way around the communications table to see a third guard lying on the ground in a sleeping bag, pointing a now third Glock at him. The two men stared at each other, guns drawn, hesitation in the air. The last guard begins to raise his left hand and say with a shaky voice, "Okay, sir, please, let's just..." And the gun rings out. The back of the guard's throat explodes against the wall behind him. Then the back of his head paints the wall another shade of crimson as the second round from Rekkr's pistol turns the lights out of the remaining guard. Rekkr, now kneeling down to the ground, checks his vest where the third guard's bullet struck. "Damn it, that hurt," was all he could think to say. Leaving the dead man in his new soft coffin, Rekkr goes to the communications table and grabs anything with notes, batteries, and 2 spare portable radios. Throws them into an empty black rucksack he found near a footlocker by the table. And before he shuts the door on his way out, Rekkr turns back and looks at the mess of what was left of the last guard. He wrote down on a yellow sticky note near the radio transceiver, "Rekkr was here." Underneath that he wrote, "No pity, no remorse, no fear." That's when he noticed the camera, red light on, and a silent alarm that was blinking red against the wall behind the radio equipment. Damn it. Off in the distance, an audible alarm is now sounding. Adrenaline and testosterone filled, Rekkr turns off the light to the guard shack and exits the door. Knowing now that this checkpoint has alerted other stations, time was against him. Panicked voices can now be heard on the radio coming from the shack, but no one was there to answer the radio traffic, and he smiled about the carnage that would be found. Rekkr, speaking slowly enough that only he could hear, "Make the wicked fear again." Walking away from the shack, he quickly looks around and hears something, breathing or whimpering. He sees the porta-john and fires 5 more rounds into it, thinking, "Guess there was a 4th man here after all." He thought to himself, of course, this is a 4-man station. 2 guards on the road, 1 on radio watch, and the other guys for relieving the others to use the head, eat, or sleep. Must have hit them at guard change. Then he hears it again, breathing or whimpering. Rekkr carefully opens the porta-john. The mess of a man sitting in there was to be expected, but he wasn't the one making the noise. Rekkr then looks back towards the shack. He quickly pies around the corner of the building, facing the wood line, and sees the unexpected. A young boy, huddled in his clothes, holding his knees to his chest, and locked inside a large chain-link dog kennel. This must have been their prisoner holding cell. Without waiting for response, Rekkr shoots the cheap padlock off the chain that holds the gate shut and secure. He unlatches the gate and opens it, hand reached out toward the boy. The boy jumps up and grabs Rekkr's much larger hand, and the pair began their exfil. face covered in drying blood, and a bag of guns and ammo. Rekkr crosses the street with a freed prisoner and departs the area, quickly making his way into the wood line that he came from and disappears back into the black void of the forest. He knew what would happen to anyone visiting this site. He knew that the thoughts of men would run wild, and rumors of this killing ground would spread like a plague of fear amongst the ranks of the Legion. He would be talked about like a mythical cryptic monster that would appear shortly just to tear apart unsuspecting villagers, just like in the medieval times. Their brutal assaults on these outlying and poorly defended checkpoints were almost amusing to him. His interrogations of the guards that he would let momentarily live gave him some insight into the stories they were told while traveling through the area. Local rumors of monsters attacking people in the dark, or of a savage killer on the loose, did give him pause. Was I the only monster in these woods? He had heard the rumors of Wendigos and Bigfoots before. He was called all sorts of fantastical names: demon, devil, werebear, beast. But this was all just Legion propaganda. Rekkr hit every checkpoint the same way, with surprise and vicious intensity. He knew he could be only so lucky for so long, being grazed by a bullet once already a few raids back, and now again, but thankfully in the plates, and not the arm. There was nothing fancy with his attacks, but against untrained or just even poorly trained members of the Legion, they rarely stood a chance. These men threw away their eternal salvation to join the ranks of the beast, just to take his mark, get this job in the Legion, and get their hot food as payment. These were not warriors, skilled in battle, nor were they disciplined soldiers. They were ragged, sloppy, unorganized, drugged-up fools, led to their deaths by the demons who inhabited them. With this knowledge of his enemy, Rekkr could envelop a checkpoint like a tempest that bashes its way through any port at sea. It was truly surprising sometimes just how easy it was. The hardest checkpoint to conquer was actually the one from a week ago. Rekkr had shot 2 guards who were sharing a Led Zeppelin Zippo to light their joints. These were the poorest supplied of any of the legionary guards yet. No body armor, just old bolt-action hunting rifles that weren't even equipped with scopes. Same as all checkpoints, 3 to 4 men staged at the site, 2 up and awake, 3rd on radio watch, maybe 1 roving. No fortifications, no barriers to hide behind, just a cheap shack like the ones you can rent and turn into a small barn or something, like the ones found on the sides of the roads that says no money down and no credit checks on the advertisement billboards. On this occasion, Rekkr was able to line up the shot just right and struck both men through the neck with 1 shot, fatally disabling them both. Of course, when you hit soft tissues like the throat with a 55 grain 5.56 projectile or higher, the outcome is normally fatal. Rekkr used 3 different kinds of weapons. His least favorite was a Sig Sauer MPX that was chambered to 9mm. The gun operated great, but his concern with combatants wearing body armor made him usually stow the MPX either in a vehicle or in his pre-ambush staging area. His most utilitarian weapon was his Sig Sauer MCX. This was by far his most preferred. However, the patrol rifle was somewhat heavy and could be tiring at times during training, but it was the right weapon for most jobs. Now, Rekkr's favorite and most preferred weapon was a 20-inch heavy barrel 25-round magazine-fed Sig Sauer 7.16, an AR-10 that was chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor and shot exclusively the Hornady 147 grain match-grade bullets when he could at least find them. He called this beast of a rifle Silence. When firing this platform from long distance, he felt like the rider Death himself, who would reap a field of fleeing men easily as he would fire round after round at their sprinting souls. He couldn't help but smile every time his finger touched the golden geyser trigger. With just 2 pounds of pressure, the gun was deathly fast. He made a mess of a checkpoint guard shack with that rifle on his first attack. Let's just say that from 10 to 12 feet upon entry of a guard shack, the 6.5 Creedmoor was overkill. However, it held a 25-round Lancer magazine, so he could make repeated shots just like he could with the MCX patrol rifle. Now, checking his watch, Rekkr began to sprint back to the boys. This was about to be a long night of running for their lives again, but such was the nature of this current life. Oh well, he thought. God's with us. Come on, kid, we gotta run. Time spent on the assault: 4 minutes. Rekkr, Lake, and Dinah were huddled around the small fire when Dinah indicated to the young boy. Sprite can hump medical gear or fieldcraft supplies, I guess, but he's useless in a fight to us. Hey, did you snag a radio? Rekkr gestured to his pack. Yeah, and some batteries. But then I had to cut and run after introducing myself to them. You know, it used to be their standard operating procedure for them to have a backup radio in their trucks. I guess they either changed their SOP or these hillbillies are so underfunded that they barely have a pot to piss in, let alone secondary radios or spare vehicles that work. How much ammo did you say you found? Dinah interjected. 9 mags worth of 5.56, 20 mags of 9mm, Rekkr said. Well, that should be enough to get us into our next brawl, Lake stated proudly, and then added, but not to get us out. We really need to pick our battles when the actions are available to us. Agreed. Rekkr and Dinah said. Any buckshot or slugs? Hogg blurted out. Nada, hombre, Rekkr replied. Just pick up a damn rifle, bro. They're literally lying everywhere after one of Rekkr's little resupply missions, said Casper, with another outburst of quiet laughter. Guys, we may have to do battlefield pickups more often if the next group is larger than a fire team, said Casper, the short albino who insisted on carrying twin machetes. No one liked taking anything from the Legion because they all believed that their gear and even ammunition were tainted or cursed. It might have just been a wartime superstition, but the facts remained the same. Every engagement meant they needed a resupply from the most available resources that were available to them, which in most cases meant the dead and dying. "Duly noted, Casper," said Dinah, eyes now closed as he relaxed against his tree again. He sighed. "All over a killing field. Rekkr, my good sir, please help me understand." "If they're moving people," Rekkr defended, "they're going to move supplies with them." It was a logical decision, and there was no other substantial Legion activity in the area, I thought. I would have killed them anyways, with or without y'all. Every one of them that we kill now is one less bastard that we have to fight later. Dinah, they were torturing people, sacrificing them behind the shed. I'll kill every single one of them if God grants me the ability to. Besides, there wasn't many of them. They were easy prey. "Yeah," Lake nodded as he stubbed out his smoke. "They don't like to advertise the cult stuff. It conflicts with their humanist message." He looked over at Rekkr. "Still, 6'5" Creedmoor on a single truck convoy?" "I'm down to my last few mags," Rekkr stated. 2 or 3 spare mags of 9mm for the MPX and 3 mags for the Glock. I had to be judicious. But if I'm to be honest, I just like the sound that silence makes on rapid fire." "That's fair," said Lake. "I'm with you, brother. We're all running low on ammo, and nothing beats heavy rounds on target, right, Dinah? Besides, if you're going to hulk around that giant rifle, you might as well enjoy using it." "And the sun is setting," Dinah reminded them. "Like the other guys, the house is fire. We need to move." Between the details from Sprite's memory and conferring with the map, Rekkr, Dinah, and Lake were able to make an educated guess on the rough location of the suburb he was referring to. They set out once the sun had cleared the horizon, being careful not to skyline as they traversed the hills and followed the streams through the nighttime Tennessee Valley. They had to backtrack some, but it was more of a southerly dogleg than anything. Rekkr knew his time with the group of resistance fighters was limited. He would have to move on towards his familial Texas goals soon. They served a purpose for his long-term needs, and satisfied a pair of deep-seated needs he had since the Troubles began: to facilitate the killing of the enemy, and to bond with fellow warrior brethren and camaraderie. A still, small voice in Rekkr's heart told him that one day soon he would not have this fellowship of freedom fighters, and that he would look back on these moments for hope. He gave thanks to the Lord that morning before they set out. Everyone prayed a prayer of thanksgiving in their own way, but when Rekkr would call them to worship the Lord, none would hesitate. They knew the trouble they were in, and only God could get them out of it, or at the least, just keep them going. As they slowly climbed up the wooded gradient, angling for the shoulder of a hill where a large limestone shelf provided cover from overhead drones, Rekkr passed Lake. The smaller man stopped and lit another cigarette. He rested his arms on the butt of his suppressed Daniel Defense Mark 18. It protruded from his plate carrier and chest rig, laden as it was with what full mags he still had for the rifle. If he breaks a nail, he teased Rekkr, are you going to carry him on your shoulders? Rekkr stopped and looked down at him over his shoulder. The two shared a look. With blinding speed, he reached up and slapped the cigarette out of Lake's mouth. Quit freaking chain smoking, Rekkr growled. I need you combat effective. No one's going to wait for you to huff and puff your way up a hill or into a fighting hole. I've done my time in war, and going house to house, fighting idiots and radicals from the burning sands to the desert cities, and in suburbs and jungles, cartel-filled wastelands, gang-infested roads, at ransacked farms, and now these godforsaken mountains. For almost 20 years, I have hunted men, since before you decided it would be tough guy time, boy. The bear of a man had finally lost it. Rekkr hadn't even noticed that he had picked Lake up by his plate carrier and had drugged him closer to his face. Trust me, you're going to want that wind that you're going to be sucking when we're all running for our lives. No longer was Lake in his jovial mood, and he saw now how poking the bear was not always a good idea. Lake nodded in acquiescence, raised his hands sheepishly, relenting. Okay, man, I was just kidding. Snarling, Rekkr set the grown man back down on his feet and realized that he had once again lost control. This was happening more frequently now, and he had to dial his aggression back. Lack of tolerance of a man's BS was one thing, but Rekkr was dangerous at this point in his life to everyone around him. He had to calm himself and always remember that his goal was to get home, that he was with brothers in Christ. Even so, boys will be boys. Rekkr looked around at the rest of the group, who saw this conflict between him and Lake finally happening. He took a side glance at Sprite. The poor boy was genuinely afraid of these men again. So regretful of his actions. Rekkr, still half snarling, looked down at Lake. Understand this. If things go foobar, I can put that little boy on my shoulders and run. He leaned in real close to Lake. You're a little hefty for that, tough guy. Rekkr took point at the front of the formation, with his shadow in tow. As the men started walking in their ranger-file formation, you could hear Dinah, who was chewing out what Lake had left for an ass. Lake was a loose cannon with his mouth, which had gotten him into multiple conflicts with his team before they ever met Rekkr. But they had all grown used to him. Running his mouth was more like a coping mechanism for Lake, rather than some false bravado. Rekkr didn't really care about Lake's coping mechanisms. Lake's behavior was a sign of weakness to him, something he didn't respect or take any of, especially not in front of another brother. In groups like these, there's always an alpha and a beta. Dinah was the alpha. Lake was the typical beta, always trying to prove his worth. That's how packs work. There's a natural pecking order for a while, until everyone falls into their role. Introduce another alpha to the pack, and conflict will erupt, eventually. The group moved all night, passing through the town of Deer Lodge, then to Shiloh, next to the little nook called Hillam, and finally they hit the big river near Gainsborough. It took another 4 days to walk to Gainsborough, Tennessee, to the eastern side of Nashville. They followed the snaking Cumberland River, stopping frequently for the fresh water that it provided and the availability of food. Their ability to purify the water was far gone now, but they did the best that they could with the small bottles of bleach and cheesecloth that they had on them. The cheesecloth filtered out any large debris, and the bleach took care of the nasty bugs that lived in the water, but it still had to be boiled. Game was very limited along the river. Not that it wasn't available, but they needed to travel fast, so they gathered what they could from the forest and the river. 2 of the men in their group had small, break-down fishing rods, and they usually caught what they needed to sustain themselves. They would on occasion come across other survivors who would shelter them, people who were trying to survive on the land in their cabins and farms, people who were too far out of the way for the Legion to worry about, or small towns that had become small resistance encampments for the myriad, like the ones they previously passed through. The Lord had remnants of his people scattered along the countrysides of Tennessee, but they too could prove dangerous to newcomers. The deciding factors were those who bore the mark of the beast and those who didn't. Finally, they were in sight of Haven, Sprite's home, and the next leg of the journey. Early in the morning, before the dawn broke the first shards of light across the dark sky, Rekkr was slowly climbing up a spiral metal staircase that was fixed on the side of an old grain silo. He found a place to lay down, set his rucksack on the decking in front of him, slowly positioning his long rifle on the bag. The rucksack will help steady the weapon and give him some elevation while he scans the fortifications of the town. The silo belonged to an old farm and is at least 500 yards away from the protective walls of the suburb called the Haven. Looking over his shoulder at Sprite, who was scanning the town with Rekkr's Vortex Recon monocular, he saw the glimmer of a tear in the young boy's eyes. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah, just nervous. I'm looking for my house, sir." "Just keep your head down and stay low. Take your time finding your house if you can." Rekkr eased onto his Vortex razor scope, hoping not to have the glass of his optic give him away. They were about 30 feet in the air and had little cover to take if they were shot at. Across the field in front of them, the boys, led by Dinah. The 8-man group formed 2 teams and began their slow and low approach to the walls. While scanning the town, Rekkr was focused on providing covering fire and to act as an early warning system to any activity in the area. They didn't use radios, so it was back to hand and arm signals and signaling mirrors. This was a very tense moment for the team, and the prayer earlier didn't help to steady anyone's nerves. They were walking potentially into a trap, or worse, had to fight a small town of people, which would have been a suicidal venture. Laying prone on his stomach, Sprite could overhear Rekkr saying something or singing something real quiet while he was looking through the scope of his rifle. The young boy slowly scooched closer to Rekkr, who was clearly singing some song he had never heard before. "Ain't no sunshine when she's gone" was the only verse he could hear before Rekkr started taking deep, slow, heavy breaths and taking the weapon off safe. The team had just climbed over the wall and were going up to the first house. Now facing a daytime infiltration, the group of would-be survivors must plan out the best way in and then back out of the heavily fortified haven, located northeast of megacity Nashville, Tennessee. Will Sprite be united with his family, or will they be forced to keep searching for them? Will Rekkr still stay with the group after this mission is over? This will be a pivotal moment in the group's posture, and the hard decisions that they must make could be costly for their near future. Stay frosty. Up next is Nashville, Tennessee, suburbs in ruin. The Rekkr Chronicles, Nashville, Tennessee, suburbs in ruin. Mama said there would be days like this. Rekkr posted overwatch atop an abandoned silo on the outskirts of the suburb. Before him sprawled the ordered banks of cookie-cutter houses, cordoned off by their grid of subdivision streets. A few old cars sat rusted in the driveways. Some houses were burned, others shuttered. Most ransacked in the intervening years of upheaval and subsequent months of desperation. It was a wasteland that carried the stench of rot with it, even from his lofty perch several hundred meters away. His eyes stung at the occasional gust, making it hard to track the movements of his team as they stealthily maneuvered through the outskirts and into the town proper. They needed resources. They always needed resources. Food, medical, rope, duct tape, glue, hand tools, batteries, you name it. At this point, nothing was wasted and tossed away. They had become professional scavengers within weeks. Suburbs had the potential to be veritable supply caches. But everyone knew that, and as a result, they often carried the only true danger to a human trying to traverse this modern hellscape: other humans. Squatters, scavengers, they weren't much of an issue. Bands of drug-addled brigands and crazed, vicious cannibals employed by the Legion were moderate threats at best. The true threats were the local residents, who had created hard targets by doing what people were supposed to do in times of extreme domestic strife: coming together as a community, forming a local militia. That was the real threat, even for men like Rekkr and his team of resistance fighters, who were united in their refusal to go to war, but who each also carried their own secret objectives in the hidden chambers of their hearts. A philosophical ally could still be a functional enemy, depending upon the needs of the flesh. Rekkr knew this from his days in combat and in law enforcement, and later even more as a preacher. It seemed both of those seasons were upon him again, folded into an overlapping mantle that burdened him with each choice, and with each moment of rest he could squirrel away. They were all sleep-deprived. Dinah was the first to doze off the night before, but he usually was the first to wake. Lake burned the midnight oil with Casper and some of the others, often electing to take second fire watch. He always paid the price for it the next morning. Lake was usually combat ineffective for the first hour or two of their next day. Such things needed to be managed, navigated, and if possible negotiated. Leadership was as much about properly assessing and maintaining relationships as it was about gear, tactics, and sacrifices. The human element always got in the way, and on occasion it was the X factor that carried the day. Rekkr watched a team of men sneak and slither up to their first house. It was going to be a long day. He settled into his prone overwatch position from the rampart of the silo and took a deep, measured breath. He felt the air fill his lungs and slowly let it out, mitigating his pulse and the adrenaline that threatened to derail it. Something inside of him tingled. Dinah took point, his Scar 17 and EOTech XPS-2 holographic weapon sight making a formidable tip of the spear that could punch through brick, cars, and other forms of cover if they were engaged. He was wiry, and despite his age, nimble. Rekkr would normally object to having someone with his loadout being in the lead role, but he had seen the old biker dodge some very close calls that would have claimed lesser men, even himself. Normally one puts a guy with a carbine up front and pairs him with a shotgunner for breaching or explosive entry and sweeping the threats for response. Nothing said, "How are ya?" like a face full of buckshot at close range. They had that guy, a 23-year-old powerlifter named Hogg. He sported an old Mossberg 590 Mariner pump-action 12-gauge. It was nothing special, but Rekkr had seen them used to good effect in the desert and saw no liability with a solid, reliable pump action. But Hogg was also the only one with a working sat phone and shortwave radio. He usually rode the flanks, listening in on the enemy comms when he could and staying close enough to blow the hinges off a door if the team decided they needed to stack up and clear a house. Lake was right behind Dinah, rocking his Mark 18 with the Trijicon MRO. Fast, light, and perfect for close encounters. The short-barreled 5.56 rifle Could dome a Legion conscript at 200 meters easily, but he was balanced enough to sweep corners without resorting to a sidearm. Rekkr once saw Lake dump a mag into two men with underfolder AK-47s at a convoy ambush as they rounded a Humvee and trained a bead on them. That was actually how they met, and Rekkr was grateful for what he would later diagnose as Lake's low impulse control, translating into fast twitch muscle response. He was twitchy, but he at least had the body mechanics to put rounds on target. Dinah and Lake encountered no resistance as they came up upon the first house. Their half of the team stacked up, with Hogg on the right and Casper on the left. The second half of the team took up covering fire and enfilade positions in various positions ringing the house less than 20 meters out, just in case there was booby traps or the residents of the town had created a functional security system. A couple men crouched behind an old rusted-out Tahoe. Another went prone on an embankment with sections of a dilapidated privacy fence flanking his field of view. Two more set themselves at oblique angles far enough away from the house to see avenues of ingress or egress for many potential combatants. But all was quiet. They had spotted no Legion vehicles in the area. Rekkr's mutilation would probably keep the local myriad investigators busy for a while figuring that one out. Everyone would be on high alert, but no one wanted to go exploring. "You put a real target on your back with that one," Dinah had told him earlier that morning. "It's accelerated our timetable. We won't be able to linger here much longer before they start sending out hunter-killer teams. Your reputation will precede you, Rekkr," Lake had said. "A liability for us the longer you stay. Hopefully not a liability for you once you move on, brother." "Everything comes with a price," Rekkr remembered telling them. And now, a few hours later, they were about to find out if such a price needed to be paid. Dinah opened the door to the house. The team scanned from the entryway and flooded in. Rekkr watched them disappear into the shadows of the doorframe, like sacrifices to the maw of some dark god. Casper and Hogg followed suit, one with his Colt 6960 combat unit carbine chambered in 5.56 and the other with the Mossberg shotgun. Rekkr waited on bated breath, listening for the crack of gunfire. "What's happening?" Sprite suddenly whispered from beside him. "Shh!" Rekkr hushed. "Not now." Sprite grumbled, and Rekkr could feel the heat of his heavy-browed stare from his side, even as he tightened up his eye relief and increased the magnification on his 6-hour 7/16 scope. A few minutes went by in silence. He saw the flash of a signal mirror from one of the second-story windows. Rekkr picked up his signal mirror and flashed a response back in kind. All clear. He came off the scope for a minute to let his eyes and brain relax, knowing that the team would start to peel off from their positions and file into the house while those inside began hardening it at a fallback point from which they could launch further raiding parties. Rekkr didn't like it. He tried to avoid places where there might be people. That's why he stuck to the backcountry. But the situation had developed in a way that necessitated intervention and alteration to their standard operating procedure. He only hoped it was worth it. "So your family is still here somewhere?" he asked. Sprite nodded. "I think so." He took a sip of water from Rekkr's canteen and had provided him earlier. "I hope so." Rekkr sighed. "Yeah, me too." He stretched his back and shoulders. Let's go find out. They made their way down out of the silo, but not before Rekkr took one last long view of the town through the scope of his battle rifle. Nothing stirred. That was not a good sign. The militia that was here had either moved on or was hunkered down. Hopefully he could link up Sprite with someone he knew before people started doing what people do in these scenarios. The sooner he could get on site, though, the better. They hoofed it towards the house. Sprite was better at keeping pace than he had anticipated. He handled himself fine on the track from their camp to the silo, but he worried that the nearer they got to a familiar place, the more emotion might threaten to founder progress. To his surprise, Sprite did not react when they came upon the house. Casper was pulling rear guard duty and welcomed them in. "Home, sweet home," he joked quietly. Rekkr looked around. He had been with these men for a couple weeks now, slowly making their way west towards the abandoned city of Nashville. He was confident enough in their skill to stick with them, but 2 weeks was not enough time to take anything for granted. He had begun inspecting the reinforcing they had performed on the house. Furniture was cleared from living spaces and braced against exterior doors and windows in tactical arrays that would afford better and even more comfortable shooting positions. Any entry point that was deemed unnecessary or non-advantageous was blocked off with heavier items like old refrigerators or armoires. It was work, because all war was ultimately hard labor, but the team had done this before. They were efficient at it by now. Dinah did a good job of holding everyone together, while Lake performed the nuts and bolts of the mission. Casper, Hogg, and some of the other guys were good at maintaining discipline and staying at their post, while the others took their turns doing the heavy lifting. It was always tempting to help a fellow comrade with some heavy lifting when you were just standing, watching, and observing your sector. But these guys had figured out the hard way that doing your job is more important than helping out because you're bored. It was a good team, as long as they stayed lucky. "Many parts of the body," Rekkr had told them once. "Listen, gents, war is work. Keep your head on a swivel. Find a place to put those guns to work, stay aware of your surroundings, and do your jobs. The hardest part of war sometimes is not being able to stay awake when you're supposed to, and trying to sleep while you have the opportunity." By the time they were finished, it was nearly noon. Dinah gathered everyone around in the kitchen. It was an interior room, no windows, no chance of some enterprising sniper taking pot shots at them. "Rekkr," he began, "I think we should move as a single unit with this kid now in tow." "Agreed," Rekkr said with a nod. "I'll take point with him." Dinah thought for a moment before realizing why and what Rekkr was offering. "I appreciate that, my friend." He looked to the others. "Okay, Hogg and I will be right behind you, with Lake and Casper pulling rear guard. The rest of you stack in between. Mark this location, however, if you need to use it as our fallback. If we encounter no one, we'll regroup here in 3 hours. Set your watches and buddy up with someone who has one. No one goes alone. No heroics. We're not here to start a fight, and we can't win them anyways. If we run into trouble or get separated, find your way back to here. Remember the street names. Hogg, Jones Street, and Acropolis Way," the shotgunner replied. Dinah nodded. "Jones Street and Acropolis Way. Got it." He cinched up the 2-point sling on his Scar 17. "Okay, let's move out." It was a slow, arduous affair. Minute by minute, the team snaked its way up the streets between houses. Every 10th one they would stop and perform a search for supplies. Most residents were picked clean. Some were practically loot drops. They scavenged lots of packaged food, jars of peanut butter, fresh batteries, new socks, even unused boots, and various medical supplies. The guys with medical conditions were called in to rifle through the abandoned home's medicine cabinets for anything that they could use. Rekkr took his axe and busted open a couple of suspicious-looking sections of a wall in a house with a bunch of miscellaneous gun-cleaning supplies laying around. "Jackpot," he remarked as he found hidden stashes of OD green ammo cans and cases of unopened ammunition. There were rifle cases wrapped in tarps that housed multiple small arms, all fully loaded. Within minutes, the team knew what Rekkr had found. It was a feeding frenzy. Hogg jokingly said, "Come to Butthead," a reference from an old cartoon the guys would watch as kids before everything went biblical. The men swarmed excitingly as the 9mm, 5.56, 308, 12 gauge, and 45 ACP were divvied up. Rekkr even found some 6.5 Creedmoor for his SIG 716, though it was not the match ammo he typically used with exclusively. "Bird in the hand, baby," Lake said as he leaned over Rekkr's shoulder to observe the dissatisfied look on his face before reviewing the boxes of 6.5 Creedmoor ammunition. Rekkr shoved the boxes of ammo into his field pack and told the team, "Hurry up and grab your gear. It's time to move." After 2 hours of searching, the team decided to turn around and head back to their hardened house. The sun was beginning its afternoon crawl for the horizon. Hogg checked his map, showed Dinah and Casper the way back in case the team was separated. Rekkr had it memorized. Some of the men wanted to press on. A small argument ensued, and many turned to Rekkr for his input. Normally, the veteran would consider reinforcing a new hard point so that any ground covered would not be lost, but something still tingled inside of him, making his hairs occasionally stand on end. "Victory loves prudence," Rekkr said, recalling the maxim. "All right, drop the cat fighting. We don't need that right now. Tomorrow we'll do this again, except headed in a different direction. It could be a long night, boys, and we made it out like bandits here. Let's get back to the safe house, dig in for the night, eat chow, hydrate, and plan for tomorrow. Roger." Rekkr stared down to each man of the team and waited for the acknowledgement. Satisfied with their silence, he nodded and said, "Good. Now let's move, and do it quietly. We're not safe out here in the open while you're all arguing like a bunch of women. Deal with that drama later. I'll take point. Follow me." The trek back was not as arduous or stressful. Some of the men even joked, their laughter cut short by Dinah's ferocious reprimand and Rekkr's hard stare. "Shut the hell up," Dinah said. "We're on patrol, not the merry-go-round." The men went from looking at Dinah to seeing Rekkr turned around and staring at them all. "You are compromising our security and position. Don't do it again, fellas." One look at his glaring eyes from that half-burnt face of his, and any man riding high on dopamine swell of humor was instantly sobered up. They knew he was right. Operational security did not end even on backtrack through already cleared ground. As they neared Acropolis Way and turned east towards Jones Street, a sharp crack rang out. Everyone dove for cover where they could find it. "Anyone see it?" Dinah shouted. Before anyone could respond, another crack barked into the air, and then another, and another. Multiple small arms began loosing their payloads from more than one direction. Everyone scrambled to find the direction of the shooting while maintaining some semblance of safety behind whatever abandoned vehicle, brick mailbox, or pile of detritus that they could find. Confusion set in. No one could pinpoint the direction. Rekkr kneeled beside the corner of a brick house and listened, trying to tune out all the voices of his teammates. "Does it sound like they're aiming at us?" he finally shouted, Dinah's direction. Rekkr rose and turkey-peeked over the corner of the building and saw Dinah duck down behind a crenellated structure outcropping of one of the other houses. "How can you tell?" Dinah shouted back. "No impacts from the rounds. Can't see them hitting anything around us," Rekkr barked. Dinah looked around. He saw no areas where the lawns, sidewalks, or streets were being chewed up by bullet impacts. With that volume of fire, surely he'd see impacts in their area immediate vicinity. Perplexed, he looked at Rekkr and shrugged his shoulders. "Whoever it is," said Rekkr as he crouched, ran over to Dinah's position at the corner of the next house. "I don't think they're fighting us." "Then maybe there's a side we can throw in on," Dinah postulated. Rekkr nodded and said, "Maybe." Dinah stood up. "Team!" he shouted, whirling his finger in the air. "On me!" The men hesitantly rushed to his position, many of them still seeking cover. All eyes were on the old biker veteran. "This isn't our fight, but it's about to be," Dinah said. "We move towards the sound of the gunfire and find out what in the hell's going on. Hog, stay with me. Give me updates if you catch anything on the shortwave. Casper, you and Lake watch our backs as we move. Rest of you follow Rekkr." He turned to the hulking, bearded, burn-scarred man. Rekkr's only reply was, "You girls ready for some playtime?" Rekkr produced his Sig Sauer MCX and nodded. Dinah nodded back. "Let's do it." The encroachment upon the gunfire was much swifter than any movement throughout the previous day. It was louder and of greater volume by the time they started to smell gunpowder and see the occasional flash from a window. On the northwest corner of the town, a house had caught fire. The dust from all the commotion of the shooting was thick in the air. You could taste it on your tongue. We were literally breathing in the battle frenzy around us. Rekkr chuckled to himself, recalling the old maxim that where there is fighting, there is always fire. It's like a damn law of thermodynamics or something, he thought. "It's the Myriad," Hogg said to Dinah and Rekkr. The rest of the team caught up with him and gathered around to hear the intel. "Legion found the militia, or they got ambushed. Hard to tell from the chatter, but someone broke comms on the shortwave calling for help. Apparently, some conscripts are caught in that house fire." "Nice," Lake said with a ghoulish grin. "Casper," Dinah said, turning to the albino. "Get me a sit rep, and I want There was an explosion. Something thunderous and heavy. Everyone instinctively crouched as low as they could go. In seconds, a dark column of smoke started rising into the air. Some of the gunfire stopped, replaced by shouts over a megaphone. "Great. They've got a gun truck," Rekkr surmised. "Now's the time," Dinah said excitedly. "Go!" The team dispersed and flooded through the streets on either side of the adjoining houses that barred their path to the battlefield. Rekkr had Sprite directly behind him. It was the most calculated risk he had taken in months. He came upon a privacy fence gate linking two houses and looked over the planks. What he saw excited him more than anything. On the right were two trucks from the Legion, both outfitted with Browning M250 caliber machine guns. They were pouring heavy automatic fire into the house neighboring the one that was ablaze. Around them swarmed nearly 20 conscripts from the Legion, with their gray jumpsuits and tactical vests, all sporting pistol-caliber carbines or AK-47s. There was a third truck, but it was on fire. The shrapnel and meaty chunks of human remains scattered before the caved-in hood. Someone had hit it with some serious ordnance. Rekkr laughed to himself as the conscripts frantically tried to form a firing line, while 2 or 3 soldiers, thoroughly out of their minds, attempted to triage their blown-apart comrades. It was comically inept. Rekkr thought it was a shame that such resources were wasted on such malnourished, brain-dead fools. Rekkr's eyes traced left to see 2 houses returning fire from the windows and doors. Half the front of one house was chewed to rubble, while the heavy machine guns punched holes in the facade of the house nearest to the fire. The gunner was seeking vengeance, no doubt, but whoever was inside the house were putting up a fight with well-aimed, well-timed bursts of fire. Rekkr watched more than one conscript try to dart from cover to cover, only to be cut down or stumble with an incapacitating gunshot wound. In moments, conscript corpses littered the streets, blood pooling around their collapsed forms. Meanwhile, the rate of fire did not decrease from the houses. Rekkr had the time to switch back to his big SIG 716 and took aim through the optic. He observed several conscripts in a firing line behind a few parked cars in the street in front of the houses. Couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. 20 years ago, he was them, and his enemy was some ragtag insurgency freedom fighters in an enfilade position, taking aim with an old Enfield Mark III. The irony of circumstances was not lost on him as he lined up a shot that would penetrate at least 2, if not 3, of the Legion's soldiers. He sang the lines from a famous Metallica song to himself, while slowing down his breathing and squeezing the trigger. From whom the bell tolls. Before taking aim, he suddenly remembered the kid's sprite. He turned to see where he was behind him. He was cowering in a corner by some trash cans, arms covering his ears. He went over and bent down next to him. "Just stay here, kid," he said. "Wait until I come and get you." "And if you die?" he asked, fresh tears reddening his cheeks. Rekkr smiled, a hideous and rare thing giving his burn scars. "You ever shot anyone?" He nodded, sobs threatening to burst forth by the trembling of his lips. "Here, you ever use one of these?" He unholstered his Glock and showed it to him. The sprite shook his head. "It's too big for my hands." Rekkr grimaced, produced his pistol-caliber carbine, SIG MPX. "What about this one?" Sprite held it. Rekkr was impressed by his muzzle discipline. He seemed to like it. In softer times, he would have chuckled. Instead, he showed him the manual of arms and loaded the weapon. "Just don't shoot me, and don't shoot any of the men we're with. Just stay put. I'll be back. Find some cover. Stay out of sight." Sprite took the SIG MPX and set it down across his lap. Rekkr looked at the boy and questioned his sanity for a moment, but figured there was no better option to keep him alive. As long as he stayed there, hidden and relatively separated from the battlefield, he couldn't be a danger to anyone who wasn't trying to hurt him or rescue him. He only hoped he remembered what Dinah, Lake, Casper, Hogg, and the others looked like. Well, he thought, maybe not Lake. He smirked and rose from his proxy before returning to the privacy fence and raising his SIG 716 to the low ready position, muzzle up at a 45-degree angle and stock pressed against his shoulder. Rekkr thought that the firepower of the Creedmoor and scoped rifle was more of an advantage than his SIG MCX chambered in 5.56 that was still strapped to his back. He thought about how heavy it was to carry 3 different rifles on him and 2 pistols, but there was sentimental value in the MPX, which was the pistol caliber carbine chambered in 9mm. That belonged to his wife, and he fully intended on giving that back to her. The other extra burden of steel was his old man's Colt Trooper Mark III. The .357 Magnum was a good backup weapon for close quarters, and he just couldn't beat the cool factor of carrying the heavy wheel gun. With one fluid motion, he took aim at the line of Legion conscripts huddled behind the row of cars, switched off his safety, and began firing. They were in the middle of raising and lowering themselves from cover, taking shots at the house with their weapons. A couple of them even had their bayonets deployed. The heavy grain projectile was moving fast when it tore through the neck of the nearest conscript and buried itself in the temple of the man to his right, taking them both off their feet. Blood sprayed and their bodies lurched at the impacts. Rekkr followed up with 3 more rounds in quick succession, each running lines to the bodies of the 3rd and 4th man in line, entering into their torsos and crumpling them like unstrung marionettes. By now the others saw the danger of his flanking maneuver and swiveled left, training their rifles on his relative position. Rekkr thought the old Marine Corps mindset: close with and destroy everything. Rekkr wasted no time and burst through the fence gate, switching from the 7.16 to the lighter MCX. Empty brass flew away from him as he walked the interval between them, unloading his magazine on the handful of remaining soldiers who were too scared, and also in each other's way, to react effectively and get a proper shot off. He peppered them with 5.56 until they were spouting blood from various holes along their thighs and up their torsos to their shoulders. They tumbled back and started screaming. Exposed. Rekkr spotted cover behind the nearest Legion truck, still aflame with its hood smashed in and bodies hanging from its doors. He raced to it, unloading the last of his magazine into the general area of the enemy as he trotted. Rekkr performed a hasty magazine exchange while he had cover and concealment. From his shoulder, he heard the throaty bark of a 308 and peered around the high metal bumper to see Dinah unloading on one of the trucks with the 50 caliber machine gun. The heavy rifle rounds tore through the gunner's exposed lower half, splitting his thighs in great gushes of blood and blowing his pelvic girdle out of his hindquarters. Rekkr always liked the efficacy of a 308, just not the weight of its ammunition. The turret gunner was small, and judging now by the screams, a female. Dinah was going to put her out of her misery when Rekkr flagged for his attention and gave him the ceasefire signal. The 2 men approached each other and started assessing the battlefield. Let her scream. And let her screams fill this place for all of her comrades to hear. Fear is a weapon, he would tell himself. She chooses to side with the beast. Now let her scream and cry like one. This fight is not over. We don't have time for this mercy. Where are the men at? Years prior, a statement like that would be called maniacal or offensive. Heck, back before the beast made his evil presence known, it was hard to tell who was or was not a female at times. But the scream, it's a clear indicator. Few men can reach that sound. Even so, the eeriness of the sounds of 2 voices being heard at once, 2 screams, like a voice inside of a voice. He never got used to hearing it. The sound reminded him of the various accounts from the Catholic priest who tried to cast out demons from people during their bizarre exorcisms. You gotta understand the situation at hand. These people fought for the Antichrist. They were part of his foreseen army. There was no reasoning with them, no parley, nor negotiations, and they were actively hunting down anyone who would resist the rule of the beast. These people ate the living and the dead, and the real prize meal was a Christian. These people drank from the murky cups of satanic priests who promised them immortality and power. They supped up entities who gladly ruled over them. Still, the most bizarre sounds were the laughter from the legionnaires as they died, but it wasn't the person who was laughing. The demons only cared for the death and pain that they could bestow upon the host's body. As the body died, the demons would laugh upon leaving their broken toys, yet only the chosen people of God could hear them and discern what had actually happened. There was so much smoke in the air, houses on fire, warm bodies losing their lifeblood, scattered all over hell's half-acre of the battlefield. Then he snapped back to the scene at hand. Rekkr listened to the baleful tones as the turret gunner cried out in existential agony and collapsed into the truck bed. Dinah's accurate fire did not spare. He let her linger in her suffering, knowing the chaos that would ensue, and as predicted, Rekkr watched a handful of the Legion conscripts race over to her, their biological and anthropological instincts kicking in. Kettled into position, what came next was textbook. Close with and destroy. Dinah and Lake rushed the scene, each taking 2 of their men with them. They covered the front lawn of one of the houses and fanned out into pincer positions. When they had the obliques lined up, the 4 men unloaded on the truck bed, slaughtering everyone inside who was desperately trying to white knight their female comrade from harm. The truck bed and its surrounding vicinity was an abattoir. Bodies and chunks of bodies, blown off by Dinah's battle rifle, littered the area around the rear tires. Blood painted the body panels, and it dripped in soupy runnels from the tailgate, courtesy of the female gunner's abdominal evisceration. There was no time to celebrate. The other technical was still active, with its Browning 50 caliber machine gun, expending all ammunition in a blind rage. The gunner's fury diminished his skill, however, and Dinah was able to lead most of the team to the cover out of sight of the gunner's firing line. One of the men got caught in the back and dropped, his entrails spitting red goop out of the front in a vicious spray that speckled Dinah's boots and Lake's plate carrier. The man was dead before he hit the street. Rekkr couldn't remember the man's name. With the gunner's attention divided and his back to the other trucks, Rekkr rushed his position. He reloaded on the move and panned around the passenger side of the truck. The assault from the boys must have ignited something inside the engine. It was burning. Black smoke billowed out. The wreckage was everywhere. Rekkr methodically walked his way towards the gunner's back, took aim with his rifle and put 5 rounds into his spine, from the lumbar to the cervical. The heavy machine gun pitched its muzzle high as the conscript dropped like a sack of onions into the truck bed, limp and lifeless. Rekkr scanned either side of the vehicle as he approached closer. He was worried about friendly fire, being so close now to the enemy's position. "Deus Vult," he called out. "God wills it," came Lake's familiar baritone on the far side of the street. "Cease fire on the gun truck. I'm in front of you. This truck is cleared," Rekkr said. "Anyone left?" "No contact," Lake shouted back. "We're coming out." "No funny ideas, Rekkr." "Oh, don't tempt me, sweetheart," he grumbled, seeking the most advantageous cover around the vehicle that he could. By now the fire from the house had ceased, but the tension was still as thick as the clouds of munition smoke and the burning hulk of the destroyed truck. The house fire still blazed away, but its heat was such that it sucked the oxygen from the lawn and everything around it, and sent great clouds of white chalk into the air, high above them. It was actually quite pleasant to watch. The Rekkr didn't take long to imbibe its splendor before putting his focus back on the mission at hand. Dinah and Lake and their third man trotted up to him. "Anyone left?" Lake asked as he readjusted the 2-point sling on his Mark 18. Dinah performed a tactical reload on his Scar 17. "It's very quiet," he observed, looking over the scene of carnage. Sounds of the mortally injured female legionnaire's wails could still be heard, but not as loud as before. Dinah said, "Finally, she's dying." The possessed sometimes took longer to die than others. "We need to make contact with the militia inside the house," Lake said, panting. Rekkr looked back at the privacy fence gate from whence he came. "Yep." He turned back to Lake. "You wouldn't be sucking wind so bad if you'd lay off the cowboy killers." Lake pulled out a smoke and dug through the chest rig's admin pouch that was mated to his plate carrier. "Hey, baby, I switched to ultralights." Rekkr actually had a good laugh at that one. "This guy's all right," he thought. Lake laughingly accused Rekkr of being a hypocrite because he smoked cigars or his tobacco pipe. Rekkr followed up with, "Yeah, but my wife says I'm allowed those items for mental health and welfare purposes." Everyone had a light-hearted chuckle while gathering their thoughts and planning to hit the next house. There was another burst of gunfire from inside the house. This time it was ragged and booming, not the sharp crack of a rifle or the hardened pop of a handgun. "Hog," said Dinah. The four men raced back towards the house, but had to dive for cover as the front door began to perforate with quarter-size exploding holes. One after the other burst through the door into a cracked facsimile of its former self. Out sprang 2 Legion conscripts, one falling backwards and the other running, shooting his handgun wildly behind him as he sprinted from the house. Dinah and Lake laughed. Rekkr watched as Hog casually manifested in the shadow of the lee of the door, leaned against the battered frame, drew a bead on the conscript with his Mossberg, closed one eye, saw Rekkr and winked, then cracked off a 12-gauge slug round that buried itself in the back of the fleeing Legion soldier. The impact dislocated his shoulders and caused his arms to splay out as if he was about to swan dive. The conscript face planted into the asphalt. Lake walked over to him, put his boot on his head, and shot him in the base of his skull with his Mark 18. The 5.56 round passed through the soft tissue of the enemy's neck and fragmented in the asphalt, ricocheting up and ripping the soldier's throat to shreds, like a banana folded in half with the peel still on it. It bulged out, and fluids ran over Lake's boots. A small laugh could be heard through the conscript's clenched teeth as he died. Rekkr kept his eyes on the house, watching for movement and focusing on the doors and windows. There was a lot of movement inside, and shadows ran back and forth from cover to concealment. He motioned to Dinah, and the two advanced. They watched Hog turn towards the interior, and then vanish. Dinah shouted for him, and Rekkr produced his Glock 17, knowing the close-in work was about to begin. When they reached the door jamb, they saw Hogg struggling with a conscript carrying one of those bayoneted SKS rifles. They struggled hand to hand while Dinah tried to find a place on the interior steps to take a clear shot. Rekkr moved in, bringing his pistol to bear. Hogg's shotgun rang out, filling the room with drywall dust and a ringing in the ears. The two men looked like depictions of colonial fighters in the 1700s fighting musket to musket. Rekkr lost sight of them both, but slowly he crept forward with his pistol at the compressed ready position. More gunshots tore through the sidewall on Rekkr's left at chest height. The two men were running in circles, trying to get the angles on each other. He dropped down low, taking cover, and darted into the next entryway into the adjoining room. Another conscript was hiding in the corner, the lower half of his suit darkened with urine stains, and his arms shaking as he continued to unload his SKS rifle. Rekkr knew those rifles, and what they could do, so he laid still until the conscript had expended his ammunition, but then Murphy's Law struck. The conscript's gun jammed, and he panicked, trying to fix the malfunction but barely knowing how to work his weapon. These were not trained soldiers. They were demonized killers. They were not professional warriors. This was his opportunity. Rekkr crossed into the room and mag-dumped the bewildered man with his Glock, stitching him from groin to head. The 9mm rounds burst through the man's groin and stomach and knocked him off balance, finally ending with brain matter and skull fragments shattering against the wallpaper behind him. The man stumbled back into a corner and slumped to the ground, forever still. Rekkr immediately cleared the rest of the room, and upon leaving to go assist Hogg, a small laugh could be heard from the deep corner of that room. A screaming shout, more like a war cry, tore Rekkr from the scene. He gathered himself in time to see Hogg take a spiked bayonet from the conscript's SKS to the side of his throat, just under the chin. The cubit-long triangular piece of soft steel pierced Hogg's bearded visage and punched out the back of his neck. For a moment, the two stood there, neither believing what had happened. Rekkr, gun up, and cleared his way to the sound of the struggling and made entry into the next fatal funnel. Out from the corner of the house's interior came Casper, dual machetes, hacking and slashing at the back of the conscript and howling like a madman. If it were any other time, this would be the most comical thing Rekkr had ever seen. It was like a video out of a bad movie. Who really dual wields machetes? Our Casper does. He screamed and hacked, creating more superficial wounds than anything due to the conscript's body armor. Bereft of a primary weapon, with it still being lodged in Hogg's neck, the conscript yelled out and tumbled sideways, trying to escape Casper's wrath. In a moment of frenzy, the beleaguered young legionnaire managed to grab one of Casper's machetes, and the two grappled, grunting and straining against one another in the tumult. Casper was stabbing the man repeatedly, but with no real effect. Casper was on his back, fighting for his life, while this demon of a man continued to rampage on top of him, trying to pry the machete from his hands. "Somebody kill this guy!" Casper shouted at his remaining teammates. "I can't get a good shot," Dinah shouted. "Casper, hold still, stop moving." Rekkr holstered his Glock and produced his axe. His bulky frame filled the room as he marched up to the wrestling pair, and with one swing he hit the conscript in the upper back between the shoulder blades with the large deer antler spiked side of his Viking axe, splitting the enemy's spine in two. The man went limp. Rekkr yanked out the spike and the legionnaire collapsed onto Casper. The albino rolled him over and quickly stood up, gasping for air. Casper stepped away, heaving for more breath, trying to get his bearings. Hands on knees and then finally kneeling on the floor, Casper watched the possessed man loitering in his last breaths. He wiped his brow, machete still in hand, and he looked across the way to Rekkr, who stood over the enemy soldier with his axe, dripping blood as it hung at his side. The two men met eyes. Rekkr nodded and raised his axe again. A final downward swing on the neck of the dying man, and the fight was over. The body convulsed and stained the debris-stricken ground with dark and bright crimson fluid. A wispish laugh could be heard, echoing off the walls of the room. This was close-quarters battle in a way that none had ever experienced. Some things you just can't train for. And it was days like this where the fatigue and horror of these moments would later rob the men of a peaceful sleep. This was a different kind of evil, and a whole new level of difficult. It was the blood frenzy of the battle where men would lose themselves, where the instinct to survive took over the needs for mercy and compassion. This was where Rekkr would watch out for the men he was with, to ensure that they didn't lose themselves in the battles and struggles with the violence that they saw. Most likely this poor soul was like many others that they had fought prior, hopped up on narcotics and possessed by ancient spirits that have stalked this world for as long as the stories about them have been told. Demonically possessed drug addicts with automatic weapons, body armor, and poor tactics. On days like this, Rekkr would have to counsel the men on the bloody actions they had committed prior. Some men would go silent, eyes glazed over from the ruthless nature of the battlefield, while others just needed to talk and get the inner turmoil out in the fresh air. Lake was a talker. Dinah wasn't. We know now just how important it was to stay in constant communications with the Almighty. No sane man could walk through this current world and not lose hope every day. Rekkr often wondered what the days of Noah were really like. He often wondered, is this the type of violence that was mentioned in the scriptures? But for now, it was back to that strange, foreign silence when the sound of tired and thirsty men breathing heavily would echo off the edge of your sanity, and then you could just barely hear the whimpers of the dying that lay scattered about, and the ghostly laughter of their demonic parasites. Rekkr solemnly looked down at a lifeless hog, Dinah holding his hand and praying over him. Casper and the others looked at Rekkr. Clear this house. We don't want any would-be heroes shooting us in the back. Rekkr would then stand guard over Dinah while he embraced his fallen friend and battle brother. Hog worked at the garage with us. He was just a kid. Rekkr kneeled down and embraced Dinah with his right arm, tucking his rifle under his other arm and keeping both eyes on the door. I know, brother, but he's with the Master now. We will mourn him later. Be proud of him, Dinah. The kid was a real warrior, and he died like one. May we all get the same ending as he did. Come on, Dinah. I'll help you carry him. The team assembled downstairs with Hogg resting across Rekkr's left shoulder in a fireman's carry position. They placed their friend near the front door of the house and took up positions, while the pair remained outside for site security. It was quiet again, but the numerous fires were still blazing. Dinah and Lake were discussing taking the radios and the trucks when Rekkr went back for Sprite. To his surprise, he was still there and still intact. He took the MPX from him and cautiously led him back to the house. Keep your eyes on me, kid. Don't look down, all right? I've seen this before, sir. he softly mused. Rekkr jerked his arm. Doesn't mean you have to see more of it. I'll do as I say, boy. Spare me your nightmares tonight. Please. The two made their way over to the house. Jesus is Lord! Came an unknown voice from the second floor of the house. Christ Jesus be praised! Dinah, Lake, and the others jerked up at the sudden outburst, guns raising, and most of the team fanning out into a more secure position in the house's first floor, eyes on the stairs and ceiling. Each man took up a spot that would lend itself to overlapping fields of fire. Rekkr saw them disperse via the windows as he approached, but the tingling in his guts was gone. There were footsteps coming down the stairs in the house they were just in. Hey! We're coming down! Came another unfamiliar voice. Don't shoot! Dinah Scar 17 was trained on the stairwell. Stay sharp, boys. Were they in the house with us the entire time? Lake asked with a bewildered look on his face. Good job searching the house, guys. You only missed 3 people, Rekkr annoyingly stated. Casper demanded to know where they were hiding inside the house, and Lake followed up with, Let me guess, you got a safe room up there. The middle-aged man replied quickly, Nah, sir. We were in the upstairs master bedroom. We heard you guys fighting the Legion and thought, well, we may have allies here with us. We heard you guys going downstairs, and then that man with the cigarette in his mouth walked right past our open door to the room where we were hunkered down in. That room was going to be our Alamo moment. It was at that point that everyone on the team stared at Lake. Lake raised his hands in defeat. All right. I messed up, and I missed the room. My bad. Yeah, we thought you would have seen us since you were standing in the door, lighting your cigarette, but then you just turned around and you headed downstairs. The man chuckled with his arm still raised. Rekkr gave that one-of-a-kind stare at Lake and said, You're bad, princess? You're walking around with your head down inside a house we just had a firefight in and that you were supposed to be searching. By the throne, man, if I could, I would Darth Vader force choke you into the ground in front of everyone. We are gonna chat about this later, bro. Roger? Roger, was all Lake gave back for his reply. He knew he messed up royally, and he knew an elemental ass-chewing was in his future. Lake was an Army veteran. He knew CQB, close quarters battle tactics, but he never deployed to a combat zone. There was a difference in men who had seen combat and those who didn't. Lake would take the chewing out like a man, and the two would probably laugh afterwards. That's just the way it was in that line of work. The new strangers were searched and told to sit down on the ground. It was a man and 2 women, all adults of varying ages. The man looked to be 50. The women were younger. They looked like most of the resistance fighters Rekkr and the team had encountered. These were just more gaunt than usual, but wide-eyed, with that kind of keen sense and feral ferocity that belied a survivor's instincts. They did not have the sallow, thin-haired look of the cannibals, nor the full-faced look possessed like the Antichrist legions and their murder squads. Rekkr had seen their type many times before. They were legitimate, if not also extremely lucky. The newcomer's eyes fell upon Sprite, and the group came unstrung. They sprang up and rushed to him with open arms, and Sprite did the same. This was the family we were looking for. Thank you, The oldest woman wept. "Thank you, oh my God." She clasped Sprite to her chest and hugged him as tightly as she could, and the pair sank down to the hardwood floor of the house. "We thought the Legion wiped all the others out," the man told them. "This was supposed to be our Thermopylae, after they took our children." Wiping tears of joy from his eyes, this would be Sprite's father. "We were just passing through, man," Dinah told them. "Probably why we hadn't encountered a lot of resistance yet." "You're the first we've seen in weeks," said the younger woman, who would be the older sister Sprite now held tight in her arms. "The Legion was pretty good about wiping us out after they sent the local Myriad running back in October." The Myriad, the name given to the Christian freedom fighters who chose to stand and fight the armies of darkness wherever they could. "Bit off more than you can chew, huh?" Lake teased. Sprite's father awkwardly looked at Lake, but didn't respond. He then looked back at Dinah. "Well, now that we have her son back, we don't know what to do," Sprite's father confessed. "I guess we should just hit the road and get the heck away from here before more come." "No, we're not leaving," Sprite's mother said defiantly. "You said it yourself. This is our home. We'll die here if we must." "You almost did, lady," Lake observed. Dinah placed a hand upon his shoulder. He walked away, shaking his head, and lit another cigarette. "Rekkr, I'll take a few guys and go back and get our fallen." Hogg was still at the front of the house, and the young man was due a warrior's burial after all this was over. "If you're looking for a mission," Rekkr finally acknowledged Dinah, and then turned to Sprite's parents and said, "There's a killing field a few miles from here where they sacrifice kids around an altar. I'll show you on the map. It's fairly well hidden behind a glen, half a mile up from a waterfall. It was some sort of park or tourist attraction. There's a satanic priest that's running the show there. A witch. You want to put a dent in their plans? Kill her." With each bit of new information, the family grew more excited. To rescue the weak from the cruel was the Lord's business, and they wanted to help out however they could. Sprite's father looked at Rekkr and Dinah and said, "Well, to die is gain, gents. Let me get my gear. We can plan all this out." "Will you come with us?" Sprite's father asked. "It's just us now, but I think I know where the others of our group are hiding at. Maybe we could find them. We could all band together." Dinah and Rekkr exchanged looks. Dinah arched an eyebrow. "We could use you, Rekkr." Rekkr thought for a moment before wiping his axe clean and sheathing it back in the frog at his hip. "My mission is different. I've already lingered here too long, brother." Dinah nodded with resignation, expecting such an answer. Yeah, man, I know. I understand," said Dinah. "What could be more important than taking out this witch and saving kids?" the man protested. "You want to hurt the Legion, don't you?" "You and my wife would really get along," Rekkr said. Rekkr steeled him with a gaze. "I have a family of my own that I need to get back to, brother. Your fight is your own, sir, but I have to head to Texas. Though, in my dreams, one day there will be thousands of us fighting thousands of them. 10 myriads times 10 myriads, fighting even more myriads. But that day isn't today. Do not fear. The Lord is your shepherd. God is with us. His love surpasses all understanding. Rescue who you can, and stay in the shadow of the Almighty. Have patience and endure. Our King returns soon. Sprite's father laughed. Huh, what are you, some kind of a preacher? Rekkr locked eyes with him. Yes. A moment of impasse ensued. Eventually, the man spoke. Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways then, Mr. Rekkr. I wish you'd stay to help us, but he looked down at his son. You already have. Thank you. He extended his arm. I owe you a debt of gratitude I can never repay. Rekkr shook his hand. Just forget I was here, he said grimly, indicating Dinah and the others as well. And kill that priest. Suffer not the witch to live. On his way out of the house, Rekkr stopped by Lake, who was on his third smoke. He stopped long enough to pluck the cigarette from his compatriot's lips and took a drag off the cancer stick and flicked it onto the lawn of a bullet-ridden suburban home. Smirking at Lake and blowing out blue smoke as he started back down the street. He heard the man curse his back, but he only smiled more and kept walking, eager to get out of this war zone. Those things are going to kill you, you idiot. Don't you want to live forever? Rekkr said while turning around and walking backwards. Lake shook his head and looked at the cigarette, laughing to himself. Before Rekkr could round the next corner, a thought of his wife crossed his mind, and again, he stopped in his tracks. He envisioned his children and their mother, waiting expectantly on the farm, looking down that long driveway that led to their home, patiently waiting for his return. Dinah and Sprite's father caught up to him, with the team and newfound members in tow. Rekkr, wait up, man, Dinah yelled out in his thick Appalachian accent. Listen, man, it's better if we stick together. We understand you want to go home. Our homes are destroyed, and the only thing left is this and the boys. Dinah gestured, looking around at the hellish landscape surrounding them and the team of brothers who were all watching the conversation between them. Look, man, we want to go with you, Dinah said. Sir, we have strength in numbers, and frankly, I owe you. I owe you my life for saving my son, Sprite's father said. Besides, man, it's going to be dark soon. Plus, we're all tired, and we need a rest. Even you have to rest. And like he said, Dinah thumbed at the man to his left and then asked, Hey, brother, what's your name? It's Charles. The two shook hands and exchanged pleasantries and introductions. Like Charles here said, there's strength in numbers. Dinah suggested hunkering down for the night somewhere outside of the latest battleground. Let's rearm, eat, and rest. Then we can plan out tomorrow and look at the maps again. Rekkr, there is strength in numbers, and these people need a good leader. They don't want to stay here, and neither do we. Let's come with you, brother, and we will help you get back to your family. Rekkr stared at Dinah for some time, saying nothing. His emotions were churning like a sea storm, and his thoughts of his families were tossed like the waves. He didn't want to be slowed down, and a big group could bring a lot of attention, but also could be beneficial. Though, it would make hiding harder when the moment came, but he trusted in the Lord, and he knew these men were all godly men. Later that night, Rekkr broke bread with the group and led them in prayer. He offered counsel to anyone who needed it to get this day's carnage off their chest and out of their minds. His intent was to be a spiritual leader and a moral compass to the men that he was with. He had learned many years ago of the importance to seek the Lord after days like this, and to repent of whatever came to mind and to praise God for the life they had, no matter how rough. The men talked about the next day's goals and planned out routes based on the maps they possessed. After this, the men were assigned their night watch shifts and started racking out. They were just barely as big as a standard Marine infantry squad, which allowed for 2 people to be on watch during the night shifts. 2 men were always better than 1. The deeper parts of the night were always the most difficult to deal with due to the ever-increasing dangerous environment they were in. Not to mention 2 men awake would mean that you have someone else to talk to, which helped to pass the time. Before racking out for the night, Rekkr lit up his simple, short-stemmed corncob pipe and stared at the pictures of his family. This is what drove him to do the things he did, even if he didn't always agree with how things were done. He wasn't a Marine at war or caught patrolling the streets anymore. He was a worried husband and father who missed his family and cursed himself every day for taking this stupid job that got him stranded 900-something miles away from his family. After a while, the pipe was put out, and he hit his knees for the final time that day, with not much to say except for what was on his mind and what was in his heart. Lord, protect my family and keep them safe. Tell my wife and children that I'm on the way. To stay where they are, and I will see them soon. By sword, by gun, or by bare hands, I will fight my way back to them. Dear Lord, bless the works of my hands. Please continue to shelter us under your wings. Please continue to be our strong tower and mighty defender. God is with us, and God is for us. He will never leave us, and I will never leave him. Praise be the Lion and the throne. We wait for you, King Jesus. Praise your holy name. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. He got off his bad knees, took off his gear, and began his daily pre-sleep stretching routines. After limbering up, changing his clothes and putting on less smelly ones, Rekkr got geared back up and found a place to prop himself up for the night. His pipe, now stuffed full with the precious tobacco that he found, was smoldering again for the last time that evening. This is how you slept now, in full gear, with a readied rifle in hand. The group would sleep in one room with the least number of windows for the protection it gave, while the 2 on fire watch would patrol the abandoned home that lay about a 6-hour walk west of the embattled suburb they had narrowly escaped earlier. Except now, they were 1 man short. The loss of Hogg hasn't set in yet for the group, but his light-hearted humor and youthful presence was missed tonight during chow. How many more will they lose before this is all over? And can you really even count it as a loss? Hogg fought and died for the Lord. To die is gain. Tonight, an exhausted and paranoid group of survivors pretend to sleep peacefully in a dilapidated homestead that nature had already taken back for itself. Tonight, the team mourned the loss of a brother. Today, a soldier for God was given his crown and new name by the Master himself and told, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Praise God. Casper is cleaning his guns now and adjusting his gear, checking his bootlaces on his new boots and putting on a light jacket. He was stationed at the front of the house where the kitchen is located. There is damp in the old abandoned homestead. It must have been a farm during its better years. They found the house on accident by walking down an old dirt road that led to an even narrower dirt road that eventually led to a barbed wire fence and an open vehicle gate. In front of the gate, on the left side of the driveway entrance, was a standard black mailbox that was badly leaning over next to it. The mailbox said, "Granny and Pawpaw." The property was about 10 acres or so that was nestled deep into the woods and many miles away from the nearest highway. The home was old, half made of hewn stone and half log cabin. A fallen down front porch roof obscured the front door upon approach. The team carefully observed the property for about 20 minutes, then split up into 2 columns and made their approach. Dinah hollered out for anyone who may be hiding in the structure, but there was no response. Dinah, Rekkr, Lake, and Casper made entry into the home by the back door, which was unlocked. They searched the single-story home and found not even a remote semblance of human activity. Vines had begun to creep up the sides of the house and along the metal roof. A family of raccoons were investigating the team on the outside, which caused a comical standoff. The home was pronounced clear, and Dinah sent the other team to search the barn and adjacent structures next to it. The only thing was found was an old beaten-down tractor and some accompanying equipment. It was strange how it seemed that the forest was reclaiming the domain of man here. The yard was covered in tall grass and new saplings of the native trees in the area. A creek could be easily heard from the barn, which meant good news. The group could bathe, rinse their clothes, and get water tomorrow after the rest of the area was cleared of any unknown threats. Lake was up, watching everyone sleep and sipping on a canteen of water. He would overlook the back porch from a vantage point he found near the back door, while Casper watched the front. He would lean against the inner wall that would lead to one of the 2 bedrooms of the cabin. He could see out of the large windows that sat opposite either side of the back door. The moon was so bright that night, it was like a street light was perched in the backyard. A family of raccoons were playing just off the steps of the back porch. Lake began to reminisce of home, and his thoughts would drift to better times before the world was under the rule of the false messiah. As he lights his cigarette, he quietly sings to himself. Mama said there'll be days like this.